The election is now behind us, the nation has spoken, and a new future is ahead. What does this mean for the church, and what is to be our calling in light of the golden era of America?
Let's see what the Bible says about that. Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad you're here for this one. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll go ahead and ask you to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got podcasts coming out every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., so we'd love for you to stay in the know with what we are talking about as we are talking about some good old church future for us today.
That's right. So here we are now on the other side of a national election, which is great. I'm glad to have that behind us. President has been chosen, senators have been chosen, congressmen, and more. And we have a snapshot now of the nation that we didn't have a week ago. There was a lot of assumptions, and there were polls.
A lot of propaganda.
A lot of propaganda. A lot of things being said, but they're mostly forecasts. And it's gotten to the place where you don't even know, can I trust the polls anymore?
Exactly.
Who is being sampled? And it'd be interesting to go back now and compare polls with reality and see who is most realistic in their projections. Regardless, now we have the snapshot. Now we have a look at what a nation thinks, is interested in, passionate about, and it's been very revealing. You take into consideration all that has happened, those that were chosen, policies that seemed important to people, decisions, direction, and there's some things we can conclude. So today we're going to take a look at some things that we can observe based on these choices and the election, some observations about the culture in America right now, and then we're going to make some we're going to have some conversation about what the church then ought to do. If this is the group that we have been called to, the nation in which we live, here's a snapshot of how they think, feel, and are driven, then it's the church's responsibility to bring the gospel to light into that culture. If Jesus was made, the Word made flesh, who tabernacled among us, he came to speak the language and know the heart of the people he ministered to, then the church do the same thing in our day and time.
And again, like this word democracy, as you hear all of the time, you know, it is what reveals, like you're saying, what the people of the nation believe the direction is we ought to go. You know? And so, like you're saying, you know, you can tell and you should make observations based on what is the popular majority going on here? What direction does the nation want to go? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So it'll be really good.
So again, some observations about culture today. The first set of observations really are at the really high level. We're not going to be talking about Christianity as much as just some big picture cultural thinking that we can observe as a result of the election. So let's just jump into that. So the first observation I think that's very clear if you've been watching is that there has been this powerful shift in the public's view of media and where they get their news from. So I grew up in the era of the 60s and Walter Cronkite and, you know, people that were trusted news sources. And you turn on the TV at night because you hadn't had any new all day. And
what a day to live in. These days you can't get away from the news.
Exactly. So you turned on the evening news, and for us, it was me and my mom and dad. The evening news was on while dinner was going on. The TV was the fourth person at the table, and there was no talk. We just listened to the news. And that was where you got your information from. And the characters that we watched in the news, they were trusted people. I remember, again, growing up in Oak Cliff, we watched NBC News at night, and there was a weather forecaster named Harold Taft, and he was like the respected guy. And whatever Harold Taft said, it was going to happen. I mean, this is so far back before there was even digital maps. This is what the weather maps looked like back in the day. They were drawn maps.
Oh my goodness!
So there would be a map on the wall, and the camera would point at this map that was an outline picture of Texas, and they would draw in where the rain was going to be. And they would like colored pencil in.
That's crazy. That's crazy town.
So like a million years ago. All that to say, they were trusted characters, and you knew, I can trust these people in the news. But things started changing over time. And today, I mean, you look at this news cycle and this election cycle, things have radically changed as to who people turn to for their news. No longer do they have to wait until 6 p.m. every day to get their news, for one.
Yeah.
And then we've entered an age in which everyone's carrying a news device basically in their pocket or purse. Yeah. They've got a phone.
Yeah.
And there are untold numbers of sources you can turn to for news. And I know people like to, bash on the internet, but one thing the internet has done, it has brought freedom to choose where you get your news source from.
Yeah.
And it has pulled people away from mainstream media being the only source of news.
Yeah. And so just recently on Stephen Colbert, probably a month and a half ago or so, there was a lady from CNN that was on, and Stephen Colbert is talking to her, and he's like, well, over at CNN, we understand that you'll just report just the facts, and you just do this just the straight way. And literally the crowd starts laughing, and and she turns and looks at him and says, was that supposed to be a comedy line? Ooh. And he was like, I don't think so. And so it's like, literally mainstream media is seen as like a joke. It's seen more as a joke in the sense of like, oh yeah, they're carrying their bias while saying we're unbiased all the time, And so the establishment media, another phrase, legacy media or the traditional media is not seen with as much respect as you were saying. Back in the day. It was people don't want to just hear, some people just hear sound bites through TikTok and Instagram Reels and whatever, all that kind of stuff. But like for news media outlets, people want to hear like long form discussions more than short form. So obviously you saw that in the whole, like the presidential campaign and all this stuff. You have Donald Trump and JD Vance going on Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Tim Dillon and Aiden Ross and,
I know one of those names.
The Nelk Boys and like all the, like these, they just sit down. Hey, we're just chopping it up 30, 40 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, of this long form discussion to where you're actually talking. And so like I was hearing one of them say, if you get into a conversation for the first 45 minutes, you can kind of like bluff your way around it and just kind of like all nice talk and kind of not really get deep anywhere. But come hour 2, especially come hour 3, what you actually believe, what you actually think, and who you actually are is really going to start to come out. Anyone can kind of put on a mask, put on a face for, say, 45 minutes and just kind of chat it up and all this. But if you were to have a conversation with them and then you kind of press some people on some topics, what they actually believe, what they actually think is really going to come out. And that's what's missing from today's day and age is like actually sitting down and having some discussions with just other human beings, not just watching, candidates have long conversations. I think that's obviously a great thing.
Yeah.
But this shift away from like, hey, we're going to have a president call into Fox News or CNN or to NBC for like 4.5 minutes, and they're going to kind of give us a little rundown of things going on. Okay, well, hey, thanks for calling. All right. And it's like, that's just a super, super polished version of the things that are actually going on,
Yeah, and then their credibility has been lost, I think, in the public's eye. I think, my generation and older, they still, because they always did trust it, sometimes they still do.
Yeah.
But I think your generation, they're not into 6 p.m. NBC News. No. They're watching stuff all day long, and they're watching it on sources even different than news. They're watching it on TikTok.
Yeah.
They're watching it on some other sources, and they're getting their news bites.
And the thing is, you can get more primary sources versus the news is essentially a secondary source these days. It used to be basically primary. It was as primary as you could get.
Correct.
But nowadays you have the news reporting on a video that's been reported on by, like someone else. And so these days with the internet, you can go straight to the source, straight to the person, straight to the page that this post came from, and make the decision based on yourself rather than I've got to go to this media so that they can tell me their thoughts on this post that came from someone that came from someone,
Yeah. And it hasn't helped when, if you've been on social media for a while, you've seen a clip that has, 10 or 15 pasted videos of different media outlets from around the nation all saying the exact same line.
Yeah, exactly.
So someone owns all of this. Someone's controlling all of this.
Wait a second here. Yeah.
And that has caused a generation now to have distrust, and they've lost their credibility.
Yeah.
So I think there is this seismic shift of where people are getting their information and news from.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, because you think about like no major media outlet is getting 100 plus million views on anything.
Yeah.
Like they're just not getting that many views. But again, like the Joe Rogan, Donald Trump podcast, they sat down and talked, and it literally has over 100 million plays with Spotify, with YouTube. Like we can't even fathom that number really on a 3-hour podcast that it would get clicked on and listened to, seemingly reaching over 100 million people. That's crazy.
Yeah. So you see this decentralization of power and the press.
Yeah.
From a select few to the masses, which is actually a very good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very good thing. Back in the day, again, it was what we had and it's what we trusted. But
it for the most part should have been trusted. Like it was well respected and vetted, and it was hard to get to those positions.
Yeah,
it was not.
You didn't as much see the media with political bias. There was this sense in which their role was to be unbiased, but to ask the hard questions. That all started to change in 2010, I think, for sure. Sometime before that as well. But all of that changed, especially get into 2020, and so many things that happened there. So all that to say, yes, there has been a very large-scale shift in where people get their information from, where their news from.
Very fascinating.
That's something that's happened that's worth noting. The church should take note of that
because it's very big. Yeah,
and there's an application we'll get to later.
Yep.
Let's talk about another observation that we can firmly conclude from the election is that people, on the whole, want less governmental control over their lives. I think some of that has come from the COVID era.
Absolutely.
Telling you where you could go, where you could not go, if you could go to church, not go to church, if you had to wear a mask, not wear a mask, you had to get a shot, not get a shot, all of that.
Keep your job, not keep your job because of a shot.
Yeah, and it all came down to governmental control. From this election, there is a voice now in the nation, the large voice that's saying, we don't want that. We want less governmental control over our lives. That's a pretty fundamental shift.
Yeah, that's very big. That there is a hunger for independence and a hunger for, hey, maybe we could actually make some decisions on our own rather than I've got to rely on someone else to make these decisions for me.
Yeah, because it appeared we were moving in a direction of where there was bigger government and more control and more laws and more determinations made, more definitions coming down from the government for what gender is, what marriage is, when birth begins. And those are coming down from government as though it was the supreme power in the land. And that has all shifted by this election because there were two very distinct paths.
Yeah.
And one, the one who prevailed is one that advocates for more freedom for the individual, more freedom for the individual, for the family to own and make their own decisions, for parents to make decisions regarding their children, not a governmental power, for individuals to make their own healthcare choices, not a governmental power, for taxes to be less and for government to be less, to be smaller, limited, greater individuality, greater accountability, but greater responsibility for the individual and not with oversight from a government. Yeah. And your generation, I guess, I mean, they don't know the full scope of all of that yet. Yeah. But they don't like it.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I was going to say, there's obviously not as much history for Gen Z in their lived experience, like there's only historical experience of more government control. But I will say, obviously, you see a big Gen Z turnout, especially for Donald Trump this time around. And obviously, still a big turnout for Kamala as well. But like you got to understand the Gen Z kids are the ones that were in high school primarily during all the COVID stuff. So they were directly affected from their high school, college experiences, and they were taken out of schools and they were given laptops to do schooling with, taken away from their friends and all this stuff. And so, and it was all put on by government control. So you see a large turnout that says, hey, whoa, we had our lives totally shaken, shifted, and thrown around entirely because of government control, rules, regulations, all this stuff. I don't know if I ever want this again, you know?
And they're seeing prices go up.
Yeah, exactly.
Unable to afford groceries.
I can't buy a house. I can't have kids because everything's too expensive. I can't buy groceries. Energy is too expensive and all this stuff. And so
because of governmental decisions and control,
spending and all that stuff. I think people are connecting the dots of like, oh, whoa, hey, if I want a future, I've got to have to afford it. And if I can't afford it, then like, what am I even doing? You know? And so, and it's because of government controls. People are wanting more individual freedom.
Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's the American spirit, you know, and it's something, again, that the church must take into consideration as well. There's some implications from these higher level observations that we must take into considerations as we attempt to minister in this day, in this age.
Absolutely.
All right. Another one is, along with that same idea or perspective, is that there is a greater sense of desire for individualism and personal autonomy. I want to make my own decisions. One of the things that was a strong tenet for Trump and others that are aligned with him is more freedom for individuals, even when it comes to education, to make their own choices. And so you find that in every area of life, I think we're seeing there's this greater cry for, I don't want to be told where to go, what to do. I want to be able to live out my values. I want to be able to have my freedoms and personal autonomy to make decisions for my own family without the control of a governing authority.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, like the personal autonomy is a huge thing to be able to say, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this. And it be able to rest in your court to make that decision, you know? Whereas again, going back to the government control thing, that is like you're saying, rages against the American spirit, the founding of America and all this stuff. So I think the more people maybe play it forward as well, again, going back to the social media thing being a very big factor, I think, in people realizing what a lack of personal autonomy means and what it could look like, they're like, whoa, hold on. I don't know if I want that. I actually realize I like to make my own decisions. I like to live my life and have someone else not try to come and live my life for me, And so like with all of these things, like this is literally just observing what the majority has voted for, what the majority has said, we want these things, because these are some of the big ticket items that were just on the ballot for the presidential election. These are like, this is what the majority has said. Like, we want this. Like, greater individualism is essential to a country that's going to flourish. You can't have government control and have people be like, yeah, hey, let's go to work, and yeah, hey, let's like pay more taxes and all this stuff. Like greater individualism would be from top down. Hey, we want you to work and then thrive in your home. And all that.
Yeah, and don't you think at the same time there's this sense of which the personal autonomy has with it at least some level of morality?
Yeah.
Because I know people on the other side would say, there are those who would say, well, women need reproductive rights to be able to make the choice for their own body. Well, that's a different sense of personal autonomy. That's what we're talking about
because
here.
That's also not their body they're trying to take care of.
Exactly.
It's a different body in their body.
Exactly. And so, I think there's this general sense of morality and clarity about this that says, I don't know that I want my taxes going to pay for people in our nation that are here illegally, funding them.
Yeah.
when they're not contributing to the culture and the society. And in fact, they're taking from us. So there is a sense which the personal autonomy has a level of morality with it, and that's fascinating as well. And something, again, that has to be considered, has to be understood in light of what's happening today. For the church to really make a difference in the culture, we've got to understand how they are thinking to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, another point, another observation just from this last election cycle is that people value transparency and authenticity over an image to put forth. So again, back on the podcast idea, like people want to hear, like, what does this actual human being have to say and think about the nation and about the future and about hope and about, like what is ahead for us, And so they want to hear individuals more than, oh, let's hear from this like polished platform of like perfect ideas and like this whole system. And I want to hear from individuals, an individual that's running for an office, that's running in the Senate, that's running for president, that's running, in the House and all this kind of stuff. Like people value transparency over having everything all perfect.
Yeah. I think you saw that also with the debates. I mean, here, I kind of wonder, is presidential debate even going to be a thing in the future?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. They come off as cold. They come off as scripted almost.
Yeah.
They come off as these bite-sized pieces that at the end of it, you're like, I don't know. I don't know that I gained anything.
And then it's like, they didn't even get to finish their point because they only had 2 minutes to share all of their thoughts on the southern border. You know? It's like, what?
Yeah. Versus, like you said, the Joe Rogan long form content where someone's able to really get down into a long conversation and there begins to be, you get to hear their heart and you can really form some opinion about who this person is. I think that's one of the ways you see this difference between the authenticity versus just the public image.
Yeah.
We also saw this in the edited stories of candidates versus, again, the long form interaction that's unscripted, where someone's asking someone questions. Joe Rogan's asking questions that, as far as we can tell, were not scripted, set up in advance. There's nothing there's no teleprompter or anything. Nope. It's just like, okay, what about this? What do you think about this situation?
Yeah. Or even like whenever he's interviewing J.D. Vance and he's like, hey, tell me about your life, basically,
Right.
Like what's actually going on in your life? What's made you, as an individual? And he's like, well, I was raised by my grandma, blah, blah, blah. My mom struggled with opioid addiction and all this stuff. And you're like, wow, okay, I'm actually getting to understand more who this guy is and what makes him him and then why he pushes the policies he pushes.
Yeah.
And this makes more sense now in this context because there's transparency.
Yep.
This is an actual human being over this person's perfect and doesn't ever have flaws and never says the wrong thing and all this stuff. Like he's going to bumble around a little bit. He might like, oh, well, hold on, let me correct myself or whatever, like I would take that all day long. Someone who can talk and like that's appealing to, I think, to human beings. It's appealing.
But what's so interesting is that some of that's generational because I grew up in the era where coming up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, people are trying their best to be polished, educated, informative, and that's where your credibility came from because you knew what you were saying and you come across controlled and knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And so people are moving toward that. Coming through the 80s and then so it's all about the image. It's all about who's got the look, who's got the knowledge, and they got the respect. But that crumbled in time. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now we're in this era, this time where people really are looking for the genuine story. I want to hear what's really going on in their life.
Yeah.
There are church implications for that as well. We'll go ahead and venture off into one of those because I experienced this. As much as I study and prepare and present, and I come up with what I think is compelling information.
Yeah.
What people comment on more than anything is when I will, inside a message, tell a struggle I walked through or am in and how I'm dealing with that and where I'm turning to Christ in that. That over and over again is what people are more moved by.
Yeah.
And it just speaks to this age. There seems to be this desire for that kind of. I want to see past the shell, the frame, the front, the stage. I want to know what's going on inside there to see how real that is.
Yeah,
that
definitely
seems to matter more to people.
I mean, perfect example, I think, also is like one of my favorite speakers / teachers, I guess you could call him, Nate Finocchio. He is a dude that does not look like he has his life together even at all. You know, dude's hair's all crazy. He's usually wearing something super casual, and he's like looks super unsuspecting. Might even look like he smokes pot all the time and skateboards, but he's like 10 out of 10, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly well-spoken, amazing reader and then communicator, and he's funny all at the same time. And he's incredibly transparent and authentic, way over any image that he's trying to uphold. He's not trying to come across as look at me, I'm in a 3-piece suit and I know exactly what I'm talking about. My hair is perfectly done and all this kind of stuff. As much as there is totally room for that. I'm not saying therefore you should not try to have a good image. That's not the point.
No, there's a place for that.
But the value, I think, that in reaching people and communicating to people is the authentic, real transparency that's there. I mean, even there's just a lot of other situations where some people might look like they have it all polished and put together, and they can go out there and they can blab all day long and say all the right things, perfect things, and you're like, that person really sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but he doesn't sound like he might even connect with me ever in my whole life. So he must not even know what it's like to live a real human life. It's true. I think that is a problem with some of the very traditional pastors, that never left the 70s and 80s. Is it's too separate from real life.
But back in the day, that was the goal. You know, if you're a pastor, you had to wear a suit and you had to have your hair done nicely. If you're in the choir, you wore robes. All of that. It was the front. It was the presentation, and pastors were taught how to talk a certain way. To speak a certain way, and that gained you credibility. But that has crumbled over time. Was it because some of those people were not on the inside what they were on the outside? I'm sure that factored into it as well.
Yeah. And what will be interesting is in 25 years, whenever we're doing other podcasts, we're going to be going, it's crazy, you will be. We're going to be going, man, this image, people need to strive, people really get spoken to whenever there's a strong image and they're all put together and they look nice and for whatever, the pendulum will swing.
It will.
So going back to what we're saying here, these are observations that we can make from this last election cycle. People care more about transparency and authenticity over the image. So another big one is that the elitist power, or those that are in long-term established government, long-term Hollywood, long-term sports icons, all this kind of stuff, the elite of the elite, the voice and influence is crumbling.
It is.
It does not weigh as much, again, going back to what we were saying in the last one, but it does not weigh as much just because you hold a certain position. If you aren't relatable, authentic, a genuine human being, you are less likely to be heard, I believe.
It's true.
The elitist level and status is crumbling a whole lot. Again, you have people like the Elon Musks, even, that you would think would be in that category of they're in the elites. He's the richest man in the world.
Yeah.
He has every reason to not really relate to anyone else, but he is hey, look, I'm a regular human being just like anyone else, and here's kind of what my life looks like, and I play video games, and I do this, and I do that. I run these companies, but really I like to have long conversations, and I'm a reader, and you're like, oh, okay, that speaks way more, because you're a regular human being instead of the polished elitist, long-term status, like you're saying, I'm this way and I've been this way and I've reached the highest ranks, Yeah,
and again, look at it in political circles. Long-standing people in government have all of a sudden been pushed aside. Their voices matter less.
Yeah.
Clinton, Obama, Biden, long-term political figures all of a sudden are replaced by a guy who doesn't even come from politics.
Yeah. Which, like, I think part of it also is like, hey, wait a second. How long has this whole government thing been bad? 40, 50 years? Wait, hold on a second. How long have y'all been in government? 40, 50?
Exactly.
You know, and so I think there's a sense of like, there's been so much unrest for such a long time that it's like, let's just scrap it and start new. That's a very interesting observation.
And you see that in Hollywood. You see long-term figures that grew up or came through the era of the plastic front, the image, the wealth, the distance that they kept, the image that was the icon that you pursued, the people did pursue, but that's not the case anymore. It's not working, and it's falling apart. Sports, you see some of that as well. And sadly, you see it in church ministry as well. Long-term people that you find out later there was corruption with. And it just, the elitist power structure is crumbling. You kind of saw that again in Jesus' day with the Pharisees and the whole elitist power structure that they had. Along comes John the Baptist, along comes Jesus, these rogue characters, and topple all of that. I think we're seeing that happen in our world today.
So another observation, obviously, then is that this idea of globalism or like one world government kind of a thing is being resisted. And what an incredible thing that is. And nationalism is then being raised. You know, national, like, hey, pride for our nation, fight for our nation, America first versus America last. Like that is being now globalism resisted, nationalism, a love for our country, and a fight for our country has returned. And that's a crazy, awesome thing. You know, again, that, you know, Trump being very pro-America, Kamala being very passive America, and the nation's popular vote then is, hey, we want pro-America.
Right.
We want a pro-America president. You know, that
we want strong borders. We don't want our identity diluted with people that are not from or not willing to commit to the values of the nation.
And so for nationalism to return, that opens up some very interesting things for the nation on the Christian side of things as well, for us to use our voice into that, which again, this is the observations for right now. We will be getting to the actions soon. But
it's interesting perspective that, you know, again, growing up, I come up through America's going into Korea and Vietnam and Kuwait and other places to protect the free, or protect people to be free, democracy, allowing for it. And that all starts eroding. People are starting to question, why are we even going to war? And what are we doing? And then entanglements with other nations, especially those nations that even hate America. Like, what's happening here? And then there's this movement toward one world globalism approach. That was so much the fear back in the 80s. It was talked about a whole lot. But man, in the last 10, 15 years or so, it's become this thing that's like, okay, this is really happening.
Like,
here.
I'm seeing the organized pieces all like trying to come together to create a globalist life, you know?
Interesting observations and things we have to keep in mind as we think about who it is that we minister to and what's important to them.
And again, that the nation's majority is saying this. It's not like, and there's a fringe group out there that thinks we should fight for our nation. No, this is majority of Americans.
And so, you know, in past elections, the last couple of them, or presidential elections, there was a greater sense of division, maybe 50-50 split, we thought.
I mean, especially 2020 with like, every day it's like, there's 10 new riots and these 5 cities were burned down, and it's and these people are fighting these people, and these people were killed again because, you know, all this. And it's just, it seemed like every day of the year of 2020 and 2021, it was like, wow, you cannot get a more divided nation is what it felt like. You know?
Race against race. This
economic status.
This economic group against this economic group, this religious group against this religious group. It was just
this church against this church, you know, everything. Like,
but this election has all of a sudden revealed something different, that something has happened. Something has changed. And now there is a clear majority vote in one direction. So that would indicate it's not as divided as it had been, or we had thought. But all of a sudden there is this rallying behind a more unified direction.
So fast.
So that's very interesting, and something we have to keep in mind and know as the church. Another one related to that is that there is the beginning of a return toward national patriotism.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that seemed like it was just running in the opposite direction as fast as it could for a while. People kneeling and not saluting the flag, not singing the national anthem, protesting the nation. Man, that was it was a little.
That was 4 years ago.
Unnerving.
That wasn't like, oh yeah, 40 years ago. Whenever that was just very short history.
Right. Yeah. And it just kept getting darker and darker and more divided and more controversial. But now that seems to be turning as well. There's this a mood shift of, wait a minute, we are a nation that has values. We are a nation that has a purpose, and let's unite behind that. That's what it appears, at least, because the candidate that won rallied those causes, and so now here people voted for him.
Yeah.
And it would indicate there is a return toward patriotism, toward a desire to wait. America is worth fighting for.
Yeah,
this land has value and purpose.
Yeah. There's a confidence about saying, like, yeah, I'm from America and I love it.
Yeah.
There's a desire to say, I love this nation.
Exactly.
And then there's a desire for strength to be found in this nation. You know, that's what like patriotism is to stand up proud and fighting for and being thankful for the nation. Like that's what true patriotism is.
Yeah, right. You know, there's also this sense in which we have to recognize these are not just social moves, these are not just political moves. There's a spiritual thing happening here, because a movement back toward more conservative values, more morality, smaller government, more individual freedoms, that doesn't happen just naturally. No. That is only a move of God in the hearts of an entire nation.
Yeah.
The scripture teaches the principle that whenever a nation begins to fall apart and there begins to be sin and there's corruption, God promised, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. Yeah. You have to attribute what's happening today as a beginning process of God has heard and he is healing.
And he has shown mercy.
Yes.
Like he has saved America from being in America last and overrun by illegal aliens coming into the nation to tear it apart and
tyrannical control.
Exactly.
That would have put us looking more like our founding fathers fighting against British overrule.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
And so, all of this we attribute to God alone. He is the only one that can move scales in that direction. And then the last observation we'll talk about today, and then we'll make some application to the church, what we must do to take action, is there is now a spirit of optimism, vision, and hope in the land. Just by the choices that have been made on the ballot, that is returning. There has been for some time a much more dark view of the future, a more dystopian view.
Yeah.
Most movies and media pictured the future as this dark, oppressive place, whether it was attacked by aliens or if it was just overrun by tyrannical government, whatever it was, or another nation or world war. The future is always dark.
Yeah. The idea of it's only downhill from here. It's only worse from here. It's just, we're done. There's just might as well give up on everything. And
all of a sudden now there's talk of we're going to go to Mars and we're going to create this type of governmental system now, and there's going to be less control and more freedoms, and there's more hope, and Trump calling it the golden age of America. Yeah. And all of a sudden things have changed and people are like, wait a minute, I want some of that. Yeah. I'll take that.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging.
Yes.
But that's an observation just from almost strictly cultural, governmental, political perspective. All of those, I think we would all agree on. Those are true. So,
and again, those are observations of the majority of America.
Yeah.
This is not, there's a fringe group out there that's one church in small town Ovilla that thinks these ideas are really cool. No, this is the nation has said, we desire patriotism.
Yeah.
We desire America first. We desire strength,
So based on these observations, and what are to be the actions for the church? What should the church do?
Yeah.
What's our responsibility in light of all of that? Because, again, we're to be like Jesus, who the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. The Apostle Paul would say, I became all things to all men that I might win some. And so principles of ministry tell us you have to take the truth into the culture, the gospel into the culture, and present it in such a way that they hear it, believe it, and can act on it.
Exactly.
So what does this mean for the church today? Well, I want to say right off the bat, the first thing that it means is we have a mandate from Jesus, regardless of the culture, to be the church, to make disciples. So regardless of what happens in the culture, we're still called to make disciples. We have a calling and a mandate to go into all the world, regardless of what happens in the culture. We have a calling and a mandate to stand in the confidence of who we are, that no weapon formed against us will prosper, and the gates of hell will not prevail against us. We have a mandate to preach the gospel. We have a mandate to teach and train God's ways. We have a mandate to be the ambassadors of reconciliation. So before we get into some actions here, I just want to make it clear, we're not suggesting that we are not the church as mandated by Jesus. We are all of those things, and we will continue to do all those things. But how we will do those things and what that will look like is different based upon the culture in which you live. If we were in communist China, we would still do all of those things. But how we would do that would look very different than if we lived in America after the 2024 election. So it's important that we understand all of that, and we can make some actions now that fit. What do we do now knowing these observations?
So the actions for the church from here now is that the church must resist the role of controlling rule maker. So we can't be the ones to now impose legalism on everyone and to impose tyrannical ruling from pastors and leaders in the church as guilters and shamers of those in the congregation, but to be the ones that are now encouraging more freedom and then boldly declaring the truth more confidently and unashamedly, and showing people like, hey, look, this is the nation we're in, and let's use the freedoms that we have to boldly go share the gospel and live out our faith in confidence.
It's never been the church's call or mandate to be the controlling rule maker.
Exactly.
That's never been its responsibility. But over time, churches, denominations, groups have tried to assume that role of we will make the rules in which our people live, and then we will keep an account of them and make sure that they follow them all. I would think if you look at history, you would find that has never worked.
Exactly. Like the church is always called to be salt and light, not to be the ones that keep track of everyone's sins and wrongs. God is not keeping track of Christians' sins and wrongs. You know, He has forgotten them. He has removed them from us. You know, so we're to be the ones that take the light into the world with all of the freedom and creativity that we can possibly have. And then be the salt as well to preserve the good and to hold back the bad. You know, we should still, just because it's hey, we have more freedoms in our land, doesn't mean oh, hey, everyone's saved now all of a sudden. No, we still have every bit of the role and main goal to take the gospel into every area, you know? And so that's what we are to do now.
And we shouldn't do the thing that we just watched be turned down in America.
Exactly.
Stop ruling us, with an iron hand, basically.
Exactly.
The church should have never been that to begin with, should never be, but we sure should never assume that role as, well, our goal is accountability factor. We will hold everyone accountable. Maybe some function, maybe some place for that, but that's not really the church's mandate. We're to go and make disciples, not
and encourage freedom.
Right. Teach people to live independently and free as followers of Jesus Christ. He didn't say go and make people look like they're Christians. Go and make people behave a certain way. Go and make people who long to and desire to follow Jesus Christ because they've been set free.
And I was going to say, the verse says, the truth shall set you free. It doesn't say the truth shall now give you an accountability partner so that you don't sin anymore. But no, like you are free from your past and you are free now to live in Christ. That's what we should be.
You'd think that churches would look and people would look at history and say, okay, that has never really worked so well.
Yeah.
You know, you would look back at some independent Baptist groupings that were high rule based and look and see how many generations did that last? You know, what were the children like of that next generation? What were the grandchildren like of that generation, that form of teaching? How did that play out?
Yeah.
It doesn't go so well.
Yeah. Almost like you should test the fruit of the things that happen or something like that.
Exactly.
You know? Quite literally the fruit there.
Yeah. Show me the long-term generational impact of the Pharisees, you know, and the difference they made to go into all the world. So
so good.
Yeah, you're right. The church must resist that role of being just rule keeper and controlling factor.
Yeah. And so it's like, no doubt we should not be that, but the thing that we should be is we should be the church that empowers the people within our church to walk in Christ in every area of life. We should be the ones to continually remind people that faith reaches every area. This is not a segmented thing, but it reaches every area. In your own personal life and your faith, again, it's not the pastor's role to make the decisions on behalf of the people, but it is the people that relate directly to God. You know, the pastor is the shepherd of the flock, but he is not the one that is in control of their faith. He is not the one that has a grasp on it, but it is the people who are to walk in Christ. And it is the role of the church to empower them to do that. And the church, you know, we should empower people to walk in Christ in their marriages and in their parenting style and in their health, as your body is a temple. We should be encouraging people toward that end in their relationships to live out Christ as the priority of the relationships. That's what the church ought to be, one that empowers in all of those areas.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When people come to church and they want to they want to be told what to do, they want to be kind of scolded a little bit, they want to be fussed at for not being good enough. That never goes well for people. That doesn't play out well.
No.
Those people are usually up and down. They're in, they're out.
Absolutely.
They're all over the page. They end up having struggles.
Yeah.
It doesn't play well because that's not what we are invited to in Christ.
Exactly. And they're unhealthy to begin with because they're like almost like, hey, someone's just got to come and tell me that I just am just the worst person. I'm just a terrible sinner, you know?
Yeah.
I just got to get back to church so that pastor can really roast me. It's like, come on, dude. You think, put some more value on your life than that, can we please? You know, like that's not doing anything for you if you're going to church to get beat up. But if you're going to church to say, man, this pastor encourages me to actually live out my faith and then gives me the ability to do so, equips me with the truth to be able to walk in confidence in my marriage. Yeah, that's what we should be doing. If you're like, and every time I go to church, I just feel 10 times worse every time I relate to my wife, I'd say leave that church immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're like, man, and now that I've gone to church, I know that I just have a terrible relationship with my kids. Leave that church. Yeah. Go find a church that is actually going to exhort and to teach and educate you. You know, we should be the church that empowers people to say, wow, I'm taking my faith to every area. Yeah. And to not do that is the biggest miss, I think.
And that should happen in any generation. That should happen in any culture, but especially one in which the church has the freedom to do that.
Yes,
they should take wild joy in doing that and chase it quickly, rapidly, confidently.
For sure. So another one, and I think maybe my favorite one that we have been talking about a lot here, about an action for the church, and especially now in this day and age, at the time frame in which we live, the church should no longer see itself as an information center for human beings. I could understand, again, like you're saying, in the 60s, 70s, where it's like you got your one news source for 1 hour out of the whole day in the evening.
Right.
And anything else on top of that is a book you've read or a newspaper or anything like that.
Right.
the same was probably very true. Obviously I've heard stories from my grandparents as well, being like, oh man, when we got married, there was like one book on marriage that was out.
Yeah, one Christian book.
Yeah, exactly. One Christian book on marriage that was out, and that may have been the case then. And so you would have to go to the church and you'd have to ask your pastor lots of questions, all this kind of stuff, and rely on other people to give like answers you've never heard for the first time in your life.
Yeah. The pastor was the expert.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And he's seminary trained and he's read all the books and he's got a massive library and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you still should look for a pastor that has those things.
Sure.
But the church is not just the primary information center. That's not their main role in life.
Right.
Like, will they inform? Yes. Should they inform? Yes. Is that their primary role, is to be seminary for Christians?
The masses.
No.
Yeah. Like, just a knowledge dump.
Yeah, it is not it is not let's go to church so that we can learn about the Bible. Like the church should be a place that you're going to hear stories from other people, about what's going on in life, about real faith, that you are encouraged, that you are edified by the body.
Yep.
And it's not just, okay, today you're going to learn all the history behind 1 Kings 6.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool, but how does this impact the way we live? And again, I'm saying all of those things because information is so widely available that if someone is coming to the church with a question, they have probably researched for a bit of time already.
That's
They've
true.
already heard quite a bit of things these days. So it is not like the first time that someone's asking a question whenever they come to church. They're not looking just for information. They're looking for something deeper than that. They're looking for something greater than that. So we as church leaders are thinking, let's not go information first, but let's go application, life-oriented, relationship-focused first, as well as informing.
Yeah, still going to preach the Bible.
100%.
Still going to hold to it as true.
Yeah.
Still going to teach its facts and its information. But that alone is not the only goal.
Yeah, we're not to just be seminary for Christianity.
Yeah, we are making disciples who live out their faith, and that requires interactions, that requires application, that requires long-form interactions and relationships with people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so another application, I think, for the church in this day is that the church should also not just be the one who has all control and power, but instead pushes power and accountability and responsibility down to the people.
Yeah.
The New Testament paints a picture of the leaders of the church being responsible for equipping the saints for the work of ministry.
Yeah, so good.
Not being the place where people come to only receive ministry. That's two very different looks. And so the church has to have both of those things. Yes, we are conducting ministry. Yes, we are teaching. Yes, we are counseling. But we are also equipping people so that they are actively involved in living out their faith and being involved in ministry. The person who only attends church to spectate is receiving a very small percentage of the joy that they could be receiving. That's smaller than the person who comes and serves and interacts and gives themselves away and is living out their faith on a day-by-day basis and applying the truths that they've learned. So that much in the same way as there's this move away from powerful, controlling governmental figures, there should be this move away from church seeing itself as powerful, governing, controlling centers, and encouraging people to own their faith, own your ministry, own your responsibilities, own the role for raising your children.
Exactly. Yeah.
Own the role for leading spiritual conversations in your home. Own the role of studying the scripture alone, away from the church.
Yeah.
There's an unbelievable amount of podcasts and messages and videos
Too many
books. And it's tremendous. And we want to encourage people to own all of that and live out their faith. And they be the the priests in their home.
Mm-hmm.
They be the ones who are shepherding their children. Their husbands being the ones who are giving spiritual leadership in their homes, in their marriage. Those are the things that the church has to take advantage of today and push faith and responsibility down to the people, and not just assume it's this hierarchical controlling factor from above. Another one related to this that is just fascinating to me and I get really fired up about is that the church now must be unafraid of patriotism and teaching accurate history of faith, church, and government. Again, we've come through this era where some Christians view it as sacrilegious even to have a United States flag on the stage at a church, or to mention any kind of public holiday, to celebrate Independence Day or recognize veterans on Veterans Day. Wow, what a shame. What a distance we've come away from the founding fathers' intentions, from a whole worldview that says God is God over all, and He has a purpose and a plan for everything, including government, including the church, that faith must interact into every sphere of life, and our calling as disciples is to take that gospel into every part of life, into every nation. The church has to get past all of that and wake up into the reality that, hey, our birth is in faith in government, and we must return. We have gone through almost potential collapse because we tried to remove it from it. It's time for it to return.
So good. Yeah. So good. So another action for the church is that the church must teach and free people to be psychologically healthy through their spiritual health, because those are directly tied. I would say you cannot be psychologically healthy without being spiritually healthy. If you spiritually are sick, it will play out in your mind, will, or emotions.
It's true.
So we, the church, must be the place that teaches people to be free in that regard.
Yeah. This is a hot button for us at Vertical. We have seen God heal a lot of people from psychological issues, psychological dis-ease by being spiritually healed. And I know it's an unpopular approach in many churches today, and there are those who say those two worlds have nothing to do with one another, but we are called by Jesus in the most supreme command He could give to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. It means in every one of those areas, there is the power to be free and to be whole and to be healed and to be fully given to Him.
Yeah.
We live in a world today that we are reaping the consequences of segmented, compartmentalized, divided life where faith has been pushed out, pushed out of education, faith pushed out of marriage, faith pushed out of psychology even. Yeah. And so that the matters of the mind and the matters of the will, almost by some would say that has nothing to do with my faith.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll say, I think the other big thing from this is like what the church must teach and free people to be psychologically healthy. So whenever we say free, we mean to not be addicted to something that makes you feel a little more psychologically healthy.
Yeah.
It is not, we got to teach people how to cope with their past, how to cope with their present, or how, we're not saying like, man, whenever you smoke that's great. That makes you healthy. No, like to be free from substances, to not be addicted to anything, and not even be dependent on an outside substance to make you healthy. But the church should be the place that says, hey, here is what spiritual health is available for you.
Yeah.
Here is how God reaches all the way into the absolute most broken parts of your life, the craziest past that you have. Don't deny it. Don't talk around it. You can't talk yourself out of the past you've had, but let's face it head on and let's see how Christ heals that. And then you will be free at your spiritual level, which will overflow out of that. So that's what we ought to be, the place that teaches freedom and health down to the individual level. Yeah. That should be like, that is what America is all about. Freedom and health is what we should be.
Yeah, and you're seeing that. Again, Trump brings on RFK Jr., and his whole message is, I'm going to bring health back to America.
Yeah, you're going to bring physical health to your children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's been our cry for a while. Here, we're going to bring spiritual, emotional, and psychological health.
Yeah.
Because that's what Jesus came to bring. You can't read the New Testament without seeing this. When Paul writes, it says, be anxious for nothing. I mean, that's psychological he's talking about there. He wasn't just using some spiritual metaphor, or he wasn't just writing about something related to the church or your faith only. No, he was talking about how to be psychologically well by being spiritually whole. Those two things exist hand in hand. Let all bitterness and wrath be put away from you. Psychological issues resolved from spiritual wholeness. The fruit, the evidence of someone who is walking in greater spiritual wholeness are largely psychological. The fruit, the evidence of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control. It's all there. And Jesus came to free us so we might be whole and healthy. This must be the church's mandate in this day and age. Stand up and be the voice of freedom and release and health for people in this area.
And I would even say, like, standing opposed to the people who say, well, I can't have love, joy, peace, patience, all this stuff. I can't have self-control unless I have this in my system. Say, hey, well, that's actually a sign of spiritual dis-ease that we seek to heal you from.
Right. Yeah. Do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. You could replace wine with any other additive that would be the thing that you're leaning
intoxicant.
on to try to suppress or create a cover or something you believe you must create instead of it being the natural byproduct of God healing you.
Come on. So good. So good. Another action for the church is that we must be the place that, we will tell and hear authentic stories of faith, of transformative faith in someone's life. Because, again, as we're talking about the observation that people want the transparent, the authentic, and the real, not just the polished, not just the happy, not just the we're all put together and here's your perfect, perfectly sound doctrine and blah, blah, blah. And it just sounds so beautiful and elegant and all this kind of stuff. Like, yes, have good doctrine, but we need to be authentic and real and vulnerable with the real life stories of people in your church. Because that's what makes faith come alive for individuals whenever they see it in other people's lives.
The sooner I can, as I hear a real life story here at Vertical, I'm ready to tell that story. I want someone to tell that story in the service, or for other people or on the podcast or something. That stuff is powerful. It speaks, it encourages, it creates motivation. It's more evidence. It gives glory to God of more evidence of faith and hope. And just as the culture is crying out for that in place of the plastic, like you said, the church needs to recognize this. And let's tell those stories. Let's be genuine as well.
Yeah, so good.
All right, so we move into this golden age, as Trump is calling it at this point. It's important, I think, that the church recognize, okay, if we're going into a time of ongoing, maybe even greater freedom to proclaim the gospel, be involved and engaged in what's happening in the culture, let's use this moment to be aggressive. Let's use this moment to be bold. Let's stand up and proclaim the truth in this day and time. Let's speak hope. Let's speak life. Let's preach the gospel. Let's talk about how we live this stuff out into every area. Let's talk about marriage. Let's talk about family. Let's talk about children. Let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about depression. Let's talk about gender issues. Let's talk about all of these so that people can truly be free. If we've been given the freedom, why would we sit inside our boxes and only talk about it there? Let's get beyond that. And it's the day and time we must. This is an action I think the church must take.
Absolutely. I totally agree. To be not passive, to be not soft serve, to be not, oh wow, we're just so nice and all this, but to be bold declarative. We have been given the space to be able to do that. Let's be the ones that stand up in that.
Yeah. So the last action I think we'll talk about today is an observation that come from what we saw in Trump's political campaign. That was wildly different from Kamala's. Is she never talked much about real vision for a future America. Here's what can happen. It was in theory. It was being unencumbered by what has been, and I don't remember all the whole phrase
Passage
was.
of time.
Yeah, but in Trump's campaign, you saw something very different. You saw very tangible pictures of what can be and what he will do, and it created hope in people. And we know now that moved the needle in the nation. People wanted to have hope and vision.
Yeah, as said by the majority.
Yeah, and that shouldn't be a surprise to us. But the church has sometimes become not that voice.
No.
The church has been more of the one who stands on the sideline pointing fingers and complaining and whining. And
who remembers the good old days? Man, why don't we get back to whenever things were...
Yes.
Why do we got these problems we got to face? The church would way rather talk about the good old rather than the what could be.
Yeah, you go back to the 80s, you got Dana Carvey being the church lady, on SNL and some others. You probably know what I'm talking about, dude. Oh, my God.
Sorry about it.
So sad. Anyway, the church today must be that hope-filled, vision-filled, gospel-centered place. Why would we be the place that all we have is a negative, downcast look on what the future is?
People are going to reject the gospel anyway, so might as well just back it up with who we have now.
No, I mean, crowds followed Jesus because he talked about a new kingdom coming. He talked about a new way of life. He talked about hope and vision. And people were drawn to that. The church ought to take advantage of this in our day. Mm-hmm. It ought to be our message all the time. God help us for why we ever stopped doing that to begin with.
Yep.
I understand there's times to be the prophetic voice of, declaring guilt for sin, but at the same time, there ought to be that same voice that declares forgiveness through Jesus for that guilt of that sin. There's a way to be free, and the church must learn how to speak in terms of vision and hopefulness and a future that is good. And again, we've got to get past this idea that talking about culture in the church is somehow wrong or less. No, that is a lie of the enemy that's keeping us. What happens in church stays in church. That's not what the gospel is ever meant for. Yeah. Salt can't stay in the shaker. Light can't stay under the bushel. Jesus said, take it off and let it shine. So I thought it was interesting. We'll close with this, that in the book of Acts, in the very beginning of the book of Acts, Jesus has returned to the disciples. He's spending his last days with them in his resurrected body. He's about to ascend back into heaven, and they got questions for him. They're asking some things, and they're wondering some things. And one of the questions that you find in Acts chapter 1 is they get together and they say, Lord, is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? There's a governmental question right there. There's a question. Okay, is this the moment reform is coming? Is this the moment you're about to set up yourself as king, and we're all about to be in the cabinet? We're about to take over this whole thing. Is this the moment where we're about to have a revolution? Now, in this day and time, you'd find a lot of people who would answer that and say, shame on you for talking about church and government at the same time, But what's interesting is Jesus did not do that. It says in that chapter 1, verses 6, 7, 8, that Jesus said to them instead, it's not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. He didn't shame them. He didn't say, now you stop talking about that. Church has nothing to do with the government. No, he didn't say, you keep that into yourself. You just stay back in your box. No, Jesus instead, he said, look, there are things that the Father's going to do, but it's not in your purview to get to know when that is. But here's what's going to happen, Jesus said. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. He didn't shame them for having a picture or a view of God in government. He enlarged it. He gave an even bigger view. He said, I'm not talking about just Israel. I'm talking about a kingdom that's coming to the whole earth. So you keep on doing what you're doing. You keep talking about what God has. You keep talking about what it looks like to have his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You keep talking about how that works. You keep making disciples. You keep going. And this is what the church must do today. We must not get stuck inside our box. The church should be the most visionary people on the planet. We should be the ones ahead of the game. We should be the ones talking about what God's going to do. We should be the ones preaching righteousness. We should be the ones preaching that there's hope and there's forgiveness, that there's healing from your dis-ease, that there can be restoration, there can be reconciliation, that there can be a new day that has come. There can be hope for the future. This ought to be the church's message, and this ought to be the golden era for the gospel, the golden age of the church, right, of all times.
Yeah.
So
good.
Well, fascinating discussion today.
Yeah.
I love all of that.
So
I love thinking about where we are and our responsibility in it. And it's our hope that this has been helpful for you. Come visit us at Vertical, see what God's doing here and how we are attempting to bring the kingdom to bear right here, to live with Jesus as King and his will be done here just as it is in heaven. So thanks for joining us. We're going to keep lifting him up and living him out.